quite happy kind of bringing together and solidifying our vision for the next year. I think when doing a roadmap, it's always best to come back and revisit our values and what makes us us. So that's the first part of this. We'll revisit that. Before we kick forward, I think it's worthwhile just adding in a safe harbor statement here, which pretty much just says, don't buy a MODLR for something we're implementing this year or next year. It's best to base your purchasing decisions on what functionality we already have. Okay, with that said, I'll jump in. The founding visions behind MODLR is really about ensuring that our customers can afford to have every planning manager in the business with access to the planning software, because without that, it fundamentally defeats the purpose of planning software. We want to automate all aspects of MODLR. So in other words, if there's something you can do by clicking around in the system, you should also be able to automate that, whether that's by code or by kind of another user interface for automation. And then lastly, what we want in MODLR is that the system should be never the limiting factor in kind of capability studies. So where you're looking at implementing a piece of functionality, we're not saying we want to be all things to all customers, but rather that when we're having these discussions, if MODLR can't currently do what you want, you should have an open sky, not having a glass door effectively, so you can actually build the functionality you need on top of MODLR as a platform. So you're still using MODLR and you're just enhancing what you can do. So that's kind of fundamental to where we are. I think before moving and looking back at the roadmap, it's worth also just looking at the different components to MODLR. I've grouped together our front end and back end in the web together. So that's our gateway and thin, as we call them, thin being the front end and gateway being the back end on the web. And then MODLR for Excel being our Excel add-in, where users can go in and build Excel style reports that link into the MODLR cubes. And then lastly, the actual MODLR engine. So that's where we do all that in-memory analytics. And that's the workforce behind everything. Okay, so before jumping into 2021, I thought it'd be worthwhile just checking in on 2020 and how far we've come in kind of the year. And I think it's worth pointing out, I know there's a lot on the screen, but we actually got through quite a bit of functional enhancements in the last calendar year. So we managed to introduce a new user role, an analyst who can build reports and dashboards, but they're not quite a modeler, so they can't build models from scratch. We've introduced a new mapping object, which is for efficiency reasons. It makes sure that your rules are behaving even more efficiently than a standard feeders would. If you're familiar with other products that have feeders, mappings allow you to do something that is performant as a conditional feeder, so to speak. But probably a little bit more efficient, I'd say. We've introduced process widgets so that users in the front end on dashboards can run processes. Previously, if you wanted the users to run a process in the front end, you'd need to write a custom page for that. So making that functionality again available without any kind of coding skills required. We've implemented data spreading functionality, server controls for notifications when your server is restarting and so on. For cube formulas, we've added a whole slew of cube formulas you can use in calculating numbers in cubes. We've also included a bunch of new process libraries, things like CSV libraries, FTP libraries, that mean you can kind of write a CSV file in MODLR, and then you can FTP that file to a server, or inversely, you can actually download a file using FTP. We've integrated a bunch of new API connectors. We've implemented a bring your own driver system for database connectivity, and that means that we literally support every database under the sun that has a valid database driver. And that's, so that one step alone has meant that MODLR can connect to literally every database available. As long as there's a driver, I should say. We've implemented workview set formula instructions. So if I just point this one out, this is what we saw a little bit of this with Paul's demo just a second ago. Paul used a workview set formula to insert an additional year if he was looking at the budget. We also use these formulas to style the report in a certain way. And it really has enhanced the way that we build reports. And in moving forward, we're doubling down on that strategy. So there's now in the next release before end of year, you'll also be able to set the default elements for your report based on formulas as well. So just extending that. We've introduced pivot and keep and reset functions, so you can quickly pivot your work view by another dimension without having to rebuild or pivot it manually. So it's reduced that down to a single 2 clicks to then see a report cut in a different way. And then optimizations. If I was to list the optimizations out, it would be another 3 slides in this format. So I've just put it as a lump sum. There are some optimizations that have made parts of MODLR an order of magnitude faster than they were in 2019. So it's really exciting to see that. All right, so then looking forward at next year, and again, going through and designing this a couple of weeks ago really was a pleasure, because we got to see exactly where we're gonna take MODLR and solidify that vision. And it's really, I know as a business we're 6 years old, but it's really still feels like it's just the beginning in terms of what we can do. We can already do a lot, but man, it's going to get better. So stepping into it, there's a lot here, and even in this first item, I want to kind of dissect it a little bit, because there's multiple components to this. So many of you will be aware that we've introduced a model file system. This is already supported in Engine. We're now just moving to support this in Gateway and in the Excel add-in. This file system, if I'm going to jump back and forward a little bit here. So I'm going to jump forward a couple of slides. This new file system looks like this. It's a separate section at the top of your model, and it lets you upload PDFs, Excel documents, Word documents to that folder or to any folder there. And then it also lets you add shortcuts to various model components. So you can see here we've got a variable, the month, current month. We've got some processes, the nightly actuals import, notify planning users, rollover time variables, and we can just right click and run those processes. We also have a couple of reports here, the profit and loss planning report and the sales trend by department. And you'll also notice we can see that this report here doesn't have any visualizations attached, whereas this one does. And this folder system is really going to allow us to organize our models in a different way. And that's just the starting point. So once we have the users using this platform, we'll also have this available within the Excel add-in. And that means that users can then upload from the Excel add-in their Excel reports so that they're stored within MODLR. If I jump back up to the item, we are combining this with the ability to then, in your applications, in Gateway, open those reports, those Excel reports within the backend and the front end web. So if you're familiar with these kinds of platforms, you'll be familiar with the idea of publishing an Excel document to your server and then viewing it in the web. So that's that functionality in its essence. Although there's a fair bit more to it. So one last component with that file system is that you can actually publish not just a report, an Excel document to your application, but you can publish a whole folder to your application. And that means that within the user interface of the front end, when you navigate to that screen, instead of seeing a report or one object, you'll see that same folder that we saw a second ago, and you'll have access to the processes, the work views, the variables, and kind of anything that's been added to that folder, which makes it a bit easier to maintain moving forward. And that does open a bit of a can of worms around security, and so we've got that a little bit later down on the roadmap. So I will revisit this in a bit more detail. But the next step is, the next feature on the list is conversations. So we're looking to implement a kind of a conversation system. It's a little bit like something like Slack or Microsoft Teams, but it's got a much more narrower scope. So it's looking purely, when you're looking at a report, you can open up the conversations panel, and that'll give you a breakdown of the history of conversations against that report. Likewise, you can do it for processes or for dimensions, and it really serves as a way of logging information about that report. So it might be set up a certain way initially. You can add comments around that, and then as it gets changed and its kind of life cycle kind of moves on, you can then track any changes and really keep that as a bit of a knowledge base. Within the conversations panel, you'll be able to change away from that object in question to your security groups. And security groups, for those of you who are not aware, is also a new function on the roadmap. So we're introducing security groups. So if you're part of an administrators group, you'll be able to navigate to that conversations for that group, and you'll be able to chat with other administrators of the system. Okay, moving on, notebooks. For anyone who's familiar with tools such as IPython Notebook, or I'm not sure if I've said that right, but the general principle is it's a merging of a word processor such as Microsoft Word and something like well, actually, it has that functionality of Microsoft Word, but it then allows you to add workview visualizations, work views, processes, and all sorts of other components into that Word document. And the real use case for this is where you have a month-end process that is run a couple of processes, update some variables, then check some results in different work views. You can actually have that in one big long document within the cloud and actually be interacting with that. So once you've finished that month-end process, you can tick the box at the end of the day and say that's been done, which can get archived as well. We've got some dashboard enhancements there focused around competing with the likes of some of the industry titans in the market, things like Tableau, Power BI. There's always things we can do in our dashboard environment, and initially we're going to have a focus in the first 2 quarters around making the user experience of building a dashboard simpler. It's going to be a bit more drag and drop, and there's plans to enhance some of the widgets that we already have. There's another item here, which is the package manager, which we'll show a little bit further on. The package manager is exciting. It will be exciting for any of our customers that are at the enterprise level. Anyone that has a development, test environments, and they have to deal with migrations. So this piece of functionality will save a lot of headaches moving forward, especially if you've changed or built a new cube or changed some formulas and in development, you've tested that and you want to then migrate that to production, you can build a package. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a minute. The menu designer is a new thing we're looking to implement right now in MODLR. We are aiming for a system that requires no programming knowledge in order to build a full solution. Unfortunately, right now, our menu system, by default, if you're just using the default menu, it doesn't look very nice. So our menu designer is there to allow the user to build really good-looking navigational systems or menus at the top of their applications using customer logos, any kind of iconography, and all the screens. It's kind of like building it. If you're familiar with a website development tool like a blog development tool like WordPress or Squarespace, you can drag and build your menu using just drag and drop. So it'll be very handy, and it will keep people from having to learn just that little bit of HTML to do a custom nav bar. We've integrated with a bunch of new systems over the last year. One of the things we want to do better is document how to use those and set up some sample repositories. So the idea is we'll have a GitHub repo for each integration that includes all of the different processes for how to import that data into tables in MODLR or into cubes. And then we'll actually also set up a package using the package system mentioned earlier that you can download from GitHub and upload straight into your environment. So then building a connector will be as simple as adding the integration and then installing the package for that integration, which will then give you all that connectivity. In terms of Excel now, just breaking off from the other components, we're looking exclusively at the Excel add-in. We're looking to add more model development tools into the Excel add-in, things like being able to build dimensions, formulas, and also navigate around work views in a desktop client. So that's a bit more like your traditional desktop modeling tool. Given we've gone cloud first, there's also a bit of a need from some of our users that are from a competitive product perspective. They often have a desktop tool, and so we're kind of looking to implement something around that space. All right. Just a reminder, if you have any questions, flick them through Zoom, and we'll get to them towards the end there. In terms of the next steps, there's only a few more to cover off, so I'm kind of rushing through here. Looking at adding additional security providers for single sign-on. So I've highlighted there Okta and Active Directory. These are two we'll aim to add in towards the first half of 2021, and that'll then allow you to map your current MODLR environment to Okta or an Active Directory security system. And it means that both across your web, your Excel, and your well, pretty much all the front ends, you can then log in seamlessly through that provider. So you won't have to go through standard login. We can also download your user groups from those Active Directory systems and have that mapped to security within MODLR. And that leads into the next item here, which is backend security. So at present, if you're familiar with how MODLR works, all of the security is on the front end, so what users can see there, and we go down to a kind of a self-security in that way. However, we're looking to add more security from the back-end perspective that'll then kind of trickle down to the front end. This is more important now that we have file system objects that can be shared, so that you can actually absolutely block access to a process, and even if that process is in a folder that users can see in the front end, they won't be able to access it. Backend security lets you create any number of user groups or have them driven off Okta or Active Directory, and then add or remove access to things like models, cubes, dimensions, and so on within your environment. One thing we're looking to do differently from standard providers here is also define the behavior for when new objects get created. So you can actually say that, say you have a planning users group, and you want them, when new cubes are made, you want them to automatically have access. You can set that group so that whenever new cubes are made, that group will automatically get a certain level of access. Most systems in this space will always start off as none, which can cause some issues, because every time you build an object, you then actually have to revisit your security model. And again, we want to automate that. The next item is quite an exciting one. If you use iPhone shortcuts on iOS devices, or if you're using action blocks on Android, pre-authenticated URLs mean that if you need to run a process from your mobile phone, or you want to look at a report from your mobile phone, you can do that with one click, or one tap, I should say. So you can create a pre-authenticated URL that's mapped to a single process. You can then link that to your iOS shortcut, and then with the touch of a button, you can run that process and get a callback. You can get a response when that finishes, and you can also run a report to then see, okay, did that solve the problem or what have you. And I'm thinking of a scenario here where if you're responsible for some numbers that and the upstream system's a little bit unstable, and maybe it didn't run in the right timing, but you've just received notice that it has ran, and it's kind of early in the morning, 7 or 8 a.m. You don't want to log into the system to then go run the subsequent process in MODLR. You can also just link that to an action or a shortcut on your phone and hit the button to import that. Moving on, with MODLR, it's an ongoing process to reach our certifications and our compliances. So that's something that's always fresh in our minds in terms of our direction. So we're working towards our ISO 27017, which is cloud security or cloud software ISO compliance, and our service organization compliance as well. So we're looking for that for 1 and 2 moving forward in 2021. Lastly, now there's 2 items. We want to be able to provision new instances of MODLR using an existing backup. So we have taken a backup or a package of your environment. Backups are taken every 24 hours, regardless of what you do as a user. You can trigger a save, which will also trigger a backup. And then if you want to then set that up on a new instance to debug something, you can actually just hit new instance, select that backup and go, and you'll be up and running within 15 minutes with your new environment using that backup of a production or a backup of a test environment. And then lastly, scheduling reports for delivery. So this is where we want to actually make it so that you can build a report, but then you can also schedule that report to be sent to you every Monday morning or so on. You've already got the controls to make it so that that report will be dynamic and fluid, and it will always show you kind of the latest information. So that part's already built. It's just making it so that now you can say, all right, send me that report in my inbox, make it hit my inbox at 6 a.m. on a Monday morning, and have it show you last week's performance. So that's the plan moving forward, is to allow more of that service architecture around kind of scheduling or report bursting. And we'll have that hooked into processes as well, so that you can schedule reports to burst via processes. All right, so just stepping in and kind of spotlighting some of those things. The file system plus Excel admin plus cloud view, that will let you view your Excel documents in the cloud, front end or back end. And on top of that, we're also allowing that file system view into the front end, so that any files seen there will be visible to the users. I did okay with showing this and explaining it, I believe. So I'll move forward. Is that screenshot again of the file system view. And here you can have subfolders below that. And you can see, obviously, there's a lot of intricacies and moving parts here, because these file systems will also be secured via the new security layer in the back end. So certain folders will have certain levels of access for different groups. There's also, I should also mention, there's a locking system. So you can actually lock a folder, which will then make sure that Only you as the locker can then unlock it, as long as you've got the permissions to lock it in the first place. And that ensures that no users can add additional things or delete anything or rename anything in that folder. It only works for that level. If you add another folder in here and you lock this top level, you'll still be able to add folders into subsequent levels. And then lastly, the package manager. So this is, we've moved down this path quite deeply. This is already up and running from a packaging perspective, and we're looking at the UI around that next component. You can see we're missing mappings on this list, but it's been added since I took the screenshot. And really what this shows is I'm creating here a migration to production for this month. I'm including a cube, a process, a whole bunch of reports. I've given it a description, and when I hit run down the bottom, I can also choose to tell it to email me when that package has been built. And then on top of that as well, it'll create a file called migration to production 2020-12.package that'll sit in our file system, which is the 5th icon down on the left. So once it completes, I'll get an email. I can also see it in my logs page. And when it's finished, I can see a package file in my directory there that I'll be able to download to my computer. You can actually unpack a package. It's a standard zip file, just renamed as a .package. So you can open it up and you can even actually look at the internals there. And you can make changes. And then when you upload it to MODLR, when you re-import that package to a different environment or for the same environment, you can then you'll get the same kind of method. It'll show up in your logs. You'll see completion. You can tell it to email you when it's done. So this will get around a lot of the stuff that I know across the industry companies are struggling with, is how do you maintain that migration process and ensure change control is adhered to. So that's it for Package Manager. That's it in terms of the roadmap. Happy to then talk and ask if there are any questions or comments or yeah. So floor's open.
Yeah, I can't see any questions on the Q&A, Ben, but I've got a question just to kick off, really. The process, the scheduling, that method you were talking about on your phone, detail behind that. Is there intentions around having a restart to be able to be scheduled outside of hours in the middle of the night on a weekend or something?
Yep. Yeah, there sure is. So we've gone in stages around just server controls in this calendar year. The first stage was better insight as to how your servers are restarting. So now when you restart, you should see a kind of a hold on the server is restarting notice. The next thing we added was a notification system. So you get an email when your server's down or when it's up. And then we've got one more stage where we're improving that further. So you'll get a bit more insight into what's happening at a point in time. And then as it's actually already been added to our features queue, is the idea that you can actually schedule through the gateway a restart to happen at a set interval. But that's been, so it's actually already added to our queue, and is, it's in the 4th stage. We're currently developing the 3rd stage of that functionality.
Okay, yeah. So certainly would help, because we do run it manually. We're happy to do it manually, but having it so you can schedule it at a certain time will be certainly a benefit. The other question I had was the locking of folders you talked about, and two of those folders had work views in it, and that will lock the work view, will it, or will it lock folder?
No, it wouldn't lock the work view. However, the work view itself could be locked independently. So you can right click on the work view itself and hit lock. Okay,
yeah. So that because that's certainly a risk that we would have at the moment with the big single list. Where our analysts can change some of the work views of other people. So we've definitely got a rhythm going, but there is that risk around it. So you'd prevent that by putting the security on the work view as such.
Yeah, so you can. There's a couple of ways in the new world kind of 2021 functionality landscape. You should be able to lock via the file system that we saw there. Lock's kind of like a single owner locking. So only the person who created the lock can then unlock it unless an admin overrides it. However, over the top of that, there is that new backend security, and that does actually extend to work views. So for instance, I can imagine a world where you say users have only, you've got, by default, when the security system comes out, there'll only be 2 groups, an administrators group and a users group. Initially, all of your modeler type users will be upgraded to an administrator. and they'll be added to that group. They'll still be a MODLR user type. However, the users group is dynamic, and so when a new user is added to the system, they're automatically added to the users group. And so I could see a world where you would set a number of reports to read-only mode, meaning that users can't, if they're not in the administrator group, they can't change the security, they can't change those work views. And then additional to that, you'd add a setting that says any new work views that get created, the users group will have write access to them. And that way users can create their own new work views, and they'll be automatically available to all users unless they choose to lock them independently. So that should address that there's a couple of ways to address the issue of users overriding other users' work views.
Okay, yeah, thanks. There is a question there, Ben. I don't know if you want to...
Sure, I'll read it out. So the conversation system mentioned, is that mainly for version control of the object, or can it be used to form a narrative around budget submissions, for example? So yeah, this is something we've talked about, whether it was a development tool for people building models, or if it's a user tool for collaboration. We settled on it being a user tool. However, in the short term, we'll definitely see users using this for version control around reports and processes. However, we're looking at the functionality of being able to make a comment that also points to a certain slice of that work view, and potentially even a certain cell of that work view. So it's not going to leave anything in your report or work view per se, but it will add into that conversations panel with your comment the context of, okay, when Ben made that comment, he was looking at the budget for this department in this year. And if it's kind of just basic context, but going a bit deeper with that, we want to actually be able to say, you can comment on an individual cell, and it'll say, okay, there was that context of the work view, but there was also, Ben was looking specifically at this intersection in that report. So it won't be live, it won't show in the work view. That's not the plan. The plan is to have it all in that conversations panel, but it will give you the ability to actually have it per that in cell intersection. And so in that way, I believe it can be used for adding narrative around the figures, because the actual figures will be attached to that. So is that, I think that's that question hopefully answered. I can see another question here. I'll just read out. MODLR has recently added a number of integrations. Are there additional integrations in the pipeline? Yes, so absolutely. We're looking at integrations as something we want to keep adding along the way. We haven't added it as a specific roadmap task, because it's actually very quick for us to add an integration. We can add an integration in a matter of days, and so far we've very much been adding them to the library based on user need. So when we get a support ticket, or we're in a process talking to a company and they're saying, well, actually we want to be able to connect to this system A or system B, how does that work? And we can quite quickly set up a connector in the integration library. But yeah, this year we're going to take more time, that as we add those connectors, we'll disclose it a bit better on our forums, and then we're also going to go through the additional effort of setting up a full library of processes that work to get kind of standard scenarios down with that connectivity. So if you take the example of Xero, there'll be a package you can download and a library that has getting journals, getting your chart of accounts, companies, tracking categories, reports, as well as drilling through to invoices and PDF documents. And that'll all be part of a package for that type of connector. I hope that answers the question.